Here's your host, Jim Flyzik.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jim Flyzik, and during the show we will talk about progress being made with identity management programs in the federal government. With me on the show today are Amir Dastouri, the ICAM architect, U.S. Department of Homeland Security; Colonel Tom Clancy, the Director of Identity Management Programs, Department of Defense; Jay Brooks, the Senior Executive for Identity and Access Management at the FBI; Joel Minton, the Director of Login.gov, U.S. Digital Service GSA; Sean Frazier, the Technical Evangelist, Federal MobileIron; Barrie Carson, the Director, Solutions Engineering SailPoint; and Dan Conrad, Identity and Access Management Specialist and CTO at One Identity. Identity management. You know, I've said back 12 years ago, our very first show was on identity management. We talked back then about if we can nail identity and just absolutely come up with programs that can prove the identity, not just people, things, and so a lot of other things will be so much easier to do in the future. And I know we've come a long way. Hopefully we'll hear about that today. Let's start with Amir over at DHS. Can you give us some examples of where you see progress being made in programs at DHS?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jim.
Sure.
So I could talk about three main programs that we have at DHS, among others, that have made great progress. The first one of them is called the Trusted Identity Exchange. It's really a virtual directory and attribute hub that we have in place that promotes interoperability and information sharing across all of our operating components. We use it for things like putting together identity silos to share information, authorization decisions based on attributes about people, as well as really giving the components the data they need about their people so they can manage their access for their mission. Another program that we have is called Access Lifecycle Management, actually built off of the SailPoint technology. We're really starting to move towards the identity governance. We're focused so much on PIV authentication, on federation, on how do people get in our door, but now we're really shifting that focus to, well, who are they? Should they still have that access? They had the access a year ago. Should we remove that access? So tackling some of those challenges with SailPoint. Another place we've made a lot of progress, especially in today's hurricane seasons that have come on with FEMA, is really with derived credentials and leveraging MobileIron to put a strong credential on the phones of our FEMA surge support to enable strong authentication to resources and allow them to achieve their mission as well.
Very cool. We might want to drill down on those as the show goes on. Colonel Tom Clancy, tell us about progress with identity management programs at DoD.
Well, good afternoon, Jim. Thanks for having me again. You know, I think over the last year we've continued to work hard on strengthening the authentication process in the Department of Defense, and the mobile platform is one of those. And DISA has been attacking the assured identity capability set, working on developing an issuance capability that'll leverage the devices that we're already buying, and making them a part of the ecosystem at the appropriate assurance level. Also, DMDC's been working a number of efforts to improve the authentication capability, including bringing smart card support to Linux within the Red Hat 7.4 release, and that's really going to help us eliminate some of those username password cases. We've also been working on additional multi-factor authentication capabilities in prototyping and in the field. Several of those have been approved by DoD CIO for use across the department, and also identifying, you know, how do we get after this identity federation capability, where we have out-of-band, lots of privileged users, empowering privilege access management by federating around a strong enough authentication. The Army and DISA have both made extraordinary strides in that area.
Yeah, I think, you know, the government did put something, I guess OMB put something out about multi-factor authentication programs. Barrie Carson at SailPoint, tell us how you support your government customers with identity programs.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question, Jim. I'll reference what Amir just said about the programs at DHS. We're very proud of our work in terms of helping define and implement the CDM program, Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program. It's absolutely critical to improve the security posture in agencies. And so, in essence, this program is three phases and answers three basic questions. What's on your network? who's on your network and what's happening on your network. So we're seeing a shift from a focus on the perimeter defenses, good authentication, multi-factor, and that is absolutely critical. We're seeing an increased focus on the idea that identity needs to be more at the center of the security infrastructure. Right. It really is being able to understand who has access to what resources on your network, and to govern that well, because we're seeing increasingly the breaches that are happening. Identity is the vector in. Right. Known users, compromised credentials. There's multiple ways to breach, but at the end of the day, it looks much more like an insider threat. Somebody's on the network who is authorized to be on their network, but are they well governed? Right. Is their access too broad, giving them access to inappropriate or critical information? Yeah,
excellent. Yeah, I actually taught cybersecurity at the graduate level for 18 years. I used to talk about, you deal with the perimeter, but you also need to deal with data at rest, data in motion, and the devices inside the network and what's inside those devices that are already inside your network. Jay Brooks, FBI, tell us about some progress over there that you're making with identity programs.
Sure thing, Jim. Well, thank you for having me on your program for one. The FBI has been building a provisioning and access control system for the past few years, and it's now matured to the point where it's becoming the single authority for identity data information. And we are also automating the linkages between applications and services with that identity system. And what it really does for us, it lets us auto provision and deprovision accounts and their access rights based on employment status, as well as what kind of position they hold within the organization. In addition, we've also upgraded some of our infrastructure to include standardization with our public key infrastructure to make sure that across our security enclaves, the O&M is maintained at the appropriate levels. And from a governance perspective, we just completed conducting a business process reengineering review that looked at the FBI's identity services across the entire organization. And what this review had done was identify a number of improvements and recommendations to move forward to bring identity services to a more standard architecture within the organization. And as a result of that BPR, we've also established a program management office, which is instrumental in successful provisioning and access control within an organization. What we found was it's good to have the authority at almost the highest level within the organization to ensure that development of applications and services, as well as facility accesses, can be maintained and coordinated throughout the organization.
Right, excellent, excellent stuff there. Thanks, appreciate that. Dan Conrad over at One Identity, how are you positioned in supporting your customer base and moving ahead in these identity programs?
Thanks, Jim. So, to follow along with the CDM concept, both from our counterparts at SailPoint and DHS, we're really about the who is on the network, and that's what we're finding with the breaches. It really came down to the who. Perimeter defense is, got to have perimeter defense. It goes without saying. You've got to have really control of actually who has access, and not only what they have or who has access, but what they actually have access to. So we're seeing with these breaches that we're helping the government customers identify that the who is the big important piece. Proxies and the perimeter defense goes without saying, but the who can actually be interpreted into that as well. So you can control who's coming through and how they're getting in. Insider threat is going to be the buzzword of the day for the next 5 years.
I think so too.
It's going to be, it's not just a buzzword, it truly is a buzzword. We've seen statistics manipulated in one way or another that 70% of all breaches are done from insider threat, and that's
and that's not necessarily malicious insider threat. That could be mistakes, errors,
exactly
somebody doing something wrong.
Right, and that really does bring up a great point. I mean, after looking into the concept of what I thought I knew about insider threat was the rogue administrator, which is a very important person to address.
Absolutely,
it's also the accidental user.
Right.
So I mean, it's important to watch that kind of stuff. But we're really helping our government people understand. I want to do an identity and access management program. Well, what does that really mean?
Right.
It could mean 1,000 different things.
It can.
So,
I mean, you could carry this subject so many places if you want to. Identifying messages, identifying things, identifying people, identifying data. I mean, but I think we're focused a little bit more here today on the who kind of questions.
Right. And they're figuring out. They're actually getting very good at asking the right questions now. So the who is on the network. They want to know exactly about certain things on the network, or I want to do federation, or I want to do single sign-on. What they're actually asking is very good questions now, as opposed to just I want to do identity and access management today.
Joel Minton, GSA probably plays a key role, because I would think it being a centralized agency there that there's a lot of things that you can do that can be ported to other agencies and across government. Tell us about some of the progress going on at GSA.
Yeah, absolutely, Jim. Thank you for the time. So GSA, as you know, is a shared services organization. We're here to deliver for all of the agencies to do amazing things and allow the agencies to focus on their mission while we focus on a lot of these shared services. So GSA is focused on 4 different areas when it comes to identity. The first is US Access. US Access does PIF card authentication for many different federal agencies. Over 100 agencies leverage it. Second, the ICAM program within GSA allows us to test the identity solutions that are out on the market and approve them for use within government. Third, we manage the federal PKI shared services infrastructure, which is really important for the overall security of the federal government. I'm not going to go into detail on any of those programs, but they're all very critical for making sure that we have a really solid, secure network platform. And fourth, last but not least, is login.gov. The program that I lead is the federal solution to allow citizens to have a single sign-on that they can leverage across the different federal agencies, increasing security, privacy, and usability.
Excellent. Excellent. I want to hear maybe a little bit more about them in a few minutes too. But Sean Frazier, MobileIron, tell us how you play in this space.
Sure. Thanks, Jim, for having me again.
Sure.
I think Amir hit it on the head. Obviously, we're working very closely with FEMA. We work very closely with Tom's agency as well on derived credential. I think everyone at this table probably lives and breathes derived credential and could speak some of 157 in their sleep. And for those of us who know what that is. So we end up being, MobileIron, we're not primarily focused on the identity, but we're kind of the stewards of the identity in mobile. And what that means is we have to work very closely with the identity providers to make sure we're doing the continuous monitoring and management of that credential on a mobile device. And since everything is mobile today, at least in my opinion, everything is mobile, we play a very important role in making sure we safeguard that credential and that credential is used in the appropriate way in mobile.
Yeah, mobile question's interesting to me. If you go back years, everything that was wired is now mobile, and everything back that was mobile is now wired. I mean, TV was always wireless; it's now wired. Phones were always wired, now they're wireless. And you keep going. I don't want to waste time on the show, but there's a lot of things that have sort of like changed position there, if you will.
We talk about the perimeter, and there really is no perimeter anymore. I mean, the mobile world, you go from Wi-Fi to cellular, and you're on everyone else's network, and your data comes from all different places, so the perimeter is gone.
Yeah, good point. Very good point. Let's start with Jay Brooks. If I said to you, can you name a specific application that you think is really going to benefit an individual program, what would come to mind?
Well, I mean, what we've recently done that really showed true benefit to the organization actually was driven by our brothers in GSA as far as the PIV cards are concerned. Right. So, we were a little late to the table in deploying PIV cards, but because of pressures placed on the Bureau to collaborate, to access other facilities, we had to make a concerted effort to start to deliver that product to our organization. And I'm proud to say this past year, we delivered several thousand PIV cards to our customers within the organization that really promotes more collaboration and easier collaboration without the aggravation of trying to share credentials across the organization using the federation technologies within that solution set. So from my perspective, what really benefited our employees has been the ability to use this PIV technology to gain access, easy access to GSA facilities as well as other systems that we share with our partner organizations.
Yeah, over the 12 years doing the show, it's been nice watching that evolve, to the point to where it's there now. Joel, what do you think? Would you pick login.gov, or is that just sort of a startup, or would you pick another program that's, if I asked you what program do you think identity management really helps the most, or what comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, all those GSA programs I think are super critical, Jim.
Okay.
But I am going to talk about login.gov just because I know the most about it, and I think that the future.
I think people like to hear about it too.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the citizens today are, when they go to government services, they feel like they're not being supported as well as they could be, right? So what we're trying to do with login.gov is we're trying to create a great experience once, allow us to highly secure it, allow us to create a solution that allows authentication, multi-factor authentication, and identity proofing, and allow us to do that in a really streamlined way that makes sense to the user. Sure. So all of us come from a place where we've built these kinds of platforms in the past, and doing it in the government is just a very different challenge, but one that we're super excited about, and one that we're starting to scale with multiple agencies now.
Excellent, excellent. Colonel Clancy, what program comes to mind that you think really will benefit by an identity management?
Well, I got to tell you, Jim. I mean, a lot of the challenges we have are because some of the most important users of our resources are external to our organization. So, you know, someone else is issuing those subscribers a credential, and I think what the NIST Trusted Identities Group has done over the last year plus in setting 800-63 with a new version, you know, unpacking identity assurance, authentication assurance, and then this federation idea. That's really starting to provide the foundation where we can leverage the credentials being issued by other agencies and other mission partners. For us, that's allies, other parts of the federal government, as well as some industry. That are really important to the space. And when we try and blow back, why are we still doing resource issued credentials? Why are we still doing passwords? Or why are we still doing a specific server administrator handing out some sort of key? Right. You know, we're taking those guys, they've been outside the identity stack. Federation allows us to kind of describe things in one coherent way that we can monitor more effectively and enable some of the capabilities that we described. But without that basis that of moving to a single identity standard and assurance sort of paradigm, we won't be able to do that.
Yeah, excellent point. Very good. Amir, what do you think? If I said pick one, pick a favorite, pick something that you think is really going to make a difference in terms of improving overall security and overall identity management, what program would come to mind?
Sure, absolutely. The first thing that comes to my mind is our Access Lifecycle Management program. Again, it's our identity governance platform with SailPoint. What we've really tried to do is in this whole identity space is build that identity. We've taken all of our sources of saying, how do you build an identity, with working with our human capital office for how do you bring a federal employee on board, our security office for how do you do suitability, how do you issue credentials, our procurement organization for how do you know who's managing a contract, who's responsible for the contract, tying all those sources together and saying this is what an identity looks like at DHS. And from there we can manage it wherever it goes, whether they're authenticating to on-premise or cloud applications. And very importantly, things like insider threat came, we start to build that identity, what they have access to, what high-valued assets or mission-critical applications they have access to, and if they leave, cut it all off, whether it's their network access, their PIV card, their mobile device, whatever it might be. So really kind of abstracting it up to that identity layer so we can manage it. And a final point on that is as we built that platform and the continuous diagnostics and mitigation, the CDM program came, it leverages the same technology. So the entire department is now funneling all of the reporting on who has access, what do they have access to, and are they trained, are they suitable, all that, into one common platform for the department.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, it's come a long way. I know back years ago when I was still in government, people would leave and we would scramble and find out they still had access to different things, you know, months later and things like that. And now with all the real-time tools that you have, you just, you know, with a click of a button, you know, you make sure that you take care of that. I want to hear from our industry guest also on this particular question, but first we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Amir Dastouri from Homeland Security, Colonel Tom Clancy from Department of Defense, Jay Brooks from FBI, Joel Minton from GSA, Sean Frazier from MobileIron, Barrie Carson from SailPoint, and Dan Conrad from One Identity. We're talking identity management. And when we went to break, we heard from our government guest about identifying programs that they think really will benefit by good identity management. Let's start with Sean Frazier at MobileIron. Sean, if I asked you to pick a program that you think good identity management will really make a difference, what comes to mind?
So that's probably hard for me to answer, not focused as much on identity management. But I think that the areas where we've seen success and working with Amir at FEMA and other places is where we've needed to kind of provision what we do very quickly and have it to leverage the identity that exists in the environment. So being able to onboard and offboard very fast and mobile is very important. So being able to kind of tie into that, and it's the whole team, right? I mean, obviously this is a challenging part of year for all of us, but the whole team has kind of pulled together and allowed us to be able to provision those credentials, manage those credentials, and offboard those people when needed. So it's been very successful.
Actually, that is very interesting. How do you cross over media, various media? You know, if you got identity management in a data network or whatever, now how do you make sure that it's consistent with what you're doing with mobile devices and things like that, especially if you have different types of mobile devices? You know?
Well, and you end up, mobile devices end up being lost quite a bit, so it's almost as important to be able to offboard and know that that's happened and pull those things back as it is to provision them.
Right, excellent point. Barrie, Carson, what comes to mind in terms of a particular program for you?
Yeah, Jim, I'm really excited about the tremendous opportunity that agencies have when they start to implement the CDM program. Because SailPoint Open Identity Platform is part of that technology foundation for the CDM program, and it addresses certain very specific needs of that program. But what the agencies will have is a foundation that will let them address a much broader range of challenges than just the goals of CDM. So those agencies that are implementing FICAM, ICAM programs that may need to address the thousands of controls in NIST 853 can look at that technology foundation and can start to address those requirements for controls and processes around identity by taking advantage of the other capabilities in the platform, full life cycle management of employees and contractors. Significant.
What Amir was saying.
Yeah, absolutely right. Many controls around review of access, security assessments, risk assessments, audit and control, those types of control families can be addressed by that broader technology foundation.
Excellent. Dan Conrad over at One Identity, what comes to mind in terms of programs you see being enhanced by having good identity management practices?
Well, obviously CDM has brought everything to light, right? So CDM is focused on identity and access, or has a focus on identity and access management. What we see from an industry perspective as a vendor that covers what we consider across the board in identity and access management space is a big push for privileged account management. The government's starting to realize where the breaches are coming from and that it can actually be controlled with a privileged account management solution. That's not to say that everybody wants to do it exactly the same or everybody has a good concept of what they want to do with it, but they're really starting to wrap their arms around these privileges. My history as a system administrator in the years of walking around networks unfettered with permissions to do anything I wanted to do, anytime I wanted to do, those days are probably gone for the most part. So the good old days, as we call it.
Excellent, excellent. Privilege management. Colonel Clancy, what are some of the lessons you're learning as you build these programs out?
Jim, I think one of the tacks we've tried to take is, we can't afford to go out and describe a complex set of requirements that are peculiar to our needs. But our components, particularly the warfighting military departments, they're in the fight trying to be at the edge, which is a kind of a different operational context than many of the commercial products are building to. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to orient at where these conversations are happening and about standards and assurance levels. For example, the NIST document, as well as talking about the iGov specification for assertions. How do we get our requirements into those bodies upstream? So we're talking about the capabilities the department needs so that when a commercial product arrives, it's going to meet our needs out of the box, instead of trying to put together what we think the future holds. And then 4 years later, when we've gone through the acquisition process, it doesn't really work anymore and it's too expensive to maintain.
Excellent point.
So we got to normalize and get engaged in that conversation at the appropriate place.
Excellent, excellent. Amir, what do you think? What are some of the lessons you're learning as you try to build these programs out?
Sure. So from a lessons learned perspective, I would say identity is not an IT project. It's a business project. I mean, I think we heard it from everybody here in terms of who are our stakeholders, where some of them are inside, some of them are outside. What are they using? Maybe mobile devices, maybe laptops, maybe others. So it's really a business problem. And in order to solve that business problem, this has to get escalated to leadership. And that's really what we've learned at DHS in terms of our programs really took off when we built our executive steering committees and our executive groups formed of all the CXOs. And once you have all the CXOs on board and they can kind of provide that broader vision across the department, it really helps the programs take off. And to Colonel Clancy's point, it helps you align them with the missions as you see across the components, as you see across the organization, and that top-down leadership enables these programs to take off. Because again, they touch everybody, every system, everything across the department.
I love that answer. I love that answer because I agree with that too. You know, it's if it's seen just as an IT project, you're going to struggle. If you see it as a business prop and bring in all the stakeholders, relevant stakeholders, it changes the whole definition. Joel, Minton, what do you think are some of the lessons you're learning along the way here as you work these programs?
I loved what you both just said. I think you and Amir hit it right on the head. My first learning has been it's all about the complete end-to-end process. There's many different things that will cause a customer not to have a great identity experience, and making sure that you understand the technology, but more importantly, the business processes and everything else is really critical. The other big learning that I have is that identity proofing is extremely difficult, and you cannot do identity proofing with one method and one method only. You need to have a very diverse approach. Many different data providers, many different ways of doing identity proofing. You never know, based on some of the breaches that we've seen recently, as well as other things that are happening in the market, when the effectiveness of a particular solution might not be as good as it used to be. Right. And so it's important to keep that diversification across many different identity proofing methods to allow yourself to have a great user experience and a high level of security.
Yeah, I love that answer too. You know, it goes with the privileged account thing too. You know, you're not going to have one solution fits all, and privileged accounts are probably going to have to be maintained a little bit different than some others, and administrative accounts compared to people that have classified information and so forth and so forth. You have follow-up on that?
Yeah, and one follow-up to that, login.gov, that is at the core of everything we're doing. So we're building authentication and multi-factor authentication, but we're also building that diverse approach to identity proofing as well.
Excellent. Excellent. Jay Brooks, what do you think are some of the lessons you're learning along the way here as you build these programs
Still learning, Jim, but
well,
I have a list here.
And I love it because you guys keep me smart. I'm still learning too.
So, as I said, as we were pursuing IAM solutions, the first thing to recognize as organizations start to build these things is you're going to look internally to your organization, and all kinds of IAM services are going to start to crawl out of the woodwork. And the challenge is to actually analyze those services and determine which ones are salvageable and which ones you have to basically remove from the organization. But what can really happen is you can get into an analysis paralysis where you're constantly trying to look for the best solution to make the entire organization happy. And in reality, what you need to do is actually look for a starting point. Do something simple, get a success, build confidence in the program, and people will come to your door looking for that type of service.
I like that too. Start small, get some buy-in. Don't go for the big bang theory there right out of the box.
The other two lessons to learn is basically looking at it from maturing your internal IAM services before you start to think about going external. You don't want to encounter a situation where you're trying to interface with an external organization only to find out that your internal systems aren't capable of federating that information. And then lastly, understand that there's distinct requirements between physical and logical access. Lots of organizations can get themselves hung up on the idea that the same CAC card that they use to gain access to facilities could be used for logical access to systems. And they're usually controlled by two different organizations within the agency, which means that you might be held hostage to somebody changing out a CAC card that requires the employees to use it as a logical access device. Right. So keep that in mind as you start to pursue a single architecture for IAM.
Excellent. Excellent point. Dan Conrad, what do you think are some of the lessons learned along the way here as you're working these programs?
Well, I like the start small, quick wins, and then your IAM program can actually gain speed and gain value.
The whole IT industry is going that way with agile computing and everything else. We're not going to have these things where we're going to do requirements and we'll deliver the system in 3 years.
Yeah, and over analysis of your IAM system. We're not ready to do IAM because we haven't finished analyzing it, and that's going to take the next 7 years. Well, but you're going to be vulnerable to breaches during that entire analysis period. So sometimes we get somebody that wants to boil the entire ocean, as we say, and you've got to start somewhere. Let's just pick something. You know, we've shown up at customers and they've got a long list of IAM challenges, and they're not willing to start any of them until they can do all of them. Right. And there's not a magic button. Let's just pick one that you think you can win and do well. So, I mean, what's really helped us a lot is there's companies that'll do third-party analysis of IAM solutions or third-party analysis of your IAM infrastructure and come in and say, well, you're doing this good, you're doing this poor, this really needs work today, you better get started, and pick something and get it done, and then move on to the next project.
You want to get to the top of the ladder, you got to step on the first rung first, right, and get started. Barrie, Carson, what do you think are some of the lessons learned along the way here?
Yeah, Jim, I think it's important to think about key silos, whether that's organizational or technology, and break those silos down and bridge the gaps. And I'm thinking in particular, privileged access management is a potential silo. So there's vendors who do a great job of privileged access management. But if that's not connected to your broader identity platform where those privileges become just another entitlement to see for a digital identity to review periodically, you're going to miss good governance across all these silos, and it's key to have a good centralized view of all the access, all the entitlements, whether it's privileged or non-privileged. And so you can bridge those gaps both from a technology as well as an organizational perspective, so you can get that full 360-degree view of your users.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Sean, Frazier? Some lessons learned along the way?
So I'm going to pile on to what most of these folks have already said. I think
that's the advantage of going last. You can say
exactly.
Ditto plus.
So I think, I'm a big fan of moving fast, so get quick wins and move quickly, but I'm also a big fan of planning. So plan, but plan fast. Right. One of the things that we've seen from lessons learned is that you try to go out of the gate without kind of understanding that you as an identity provider or a service provider to other folks. Application developers consume you, mobile consumes you, users consume you. You have to have a security overlay of all of that, so you can't get too far down the path without security coming in and IA looking at what you're doing and saying, okay, I bless this, I don't bless this, because you end up getting way too far ahead of them, and you can get something that you can't actually field because IA will then come back and tell you can't do it. So I think plan quickly, get something out there quickly, but plan.
Right. I used to always tell my CISO people, don't tell me I can't do it, tell me how we can get it done. What do we have to do to be able to do it? Kind of a question.
Security as an enabler. What a concept.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about the hard stuff. Challenges, things that are difficult to get where you want to go. Let's start with Joel Minton this time at GSA. Joel, tell us some of the challenges, the constraints, the things the walls you got to knock down to get where you want to be with the programs.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So I'd say the amount of things that we need to build versus the amount of capacity we have to build them is always a challenge. Right. The number of engineers in the DC area and just focusing on this technology in general, we can always use more of them. That includes engineers who can build the functionality. It also includes the engineers who can build all of the systems and the infrastructure to support it. So, what we do is we try to focus on three main things: privacy, security, and usability. We focus on those and we use those as our North Star of how we prioritize those things to make sure we can get the right things done.
Yeah, excellent. Amir, what are the hard things?
So a couple of things that we've had challenges with are honestly business process and data. So from a business process standpoint, as we align across our organization, sometimes it has to change. Sometimes business processes have to get re-engineered. And you have to snap out of this is the way I've done it for the past 10 years into now all of our systems need to align. We need to share information. We need to improve the way we manage access. And those are really hard conversations to steer an organization to do. The other part of it is data quality. Again, as we build this identity and have the identity proliferate and have access to different systems applications, we leverage data from all of our authoritative sources, again, whether it's HR, security, IT, procurement, anywhere. And these systems function very well for their purpose, but once you start looking across them and saying, how do we correlate across, what's missing, what's not missing, how well has it been maintained, you start noticing pockets of challenges. And it seems for us, at least, a lot of our identity programs have to start off with a little bit of a data cleanup, a little bit of a business process engineering, again, incremental, but knock down some of those hurdles and challenges in order to roll out the functionality.
Yeah, excellent points, excellent points. You don't want to start a big identity management program on a business process that doesn't work right to begin with. You need to get the business process correct. Jay Brooks, what do you think are some of the hard things, the challenges, the constraints that you really want to break down to get where you want to be?
Well, I mean, from our perspective, it's managing the resources that are aligned with IAM and the stresses that are being imposed on those folks, as far as almost in the sense of a three-front war. You have internal organizations that require services to be rendered by the same set of resources that are also protecting against the outsider threat, the sophisticated bad actors, as well as the collaboration, requirements that are imposed on us from outside organizations. And there's just so much that they can absorb at one time.
Right.
And what we've done, in a sense, is to basically try to look at this from our program management office for IAM to balance those requirements against each other and try to funnel them down into something that's manageable. But what really starts to occur is we start to put intense pressure on personal resources that basically start to think about, hey, is there a better life instead of spending 23 hours at the office working on these constant requirements and constant threats from external forces?
Right. Excellent point. Kind of what Joel said, skills, capacity. And what I see in a lot of agencies, there's one or two people that are really good, and then the bench strength goes away pretty quick, because of just the challenge to get people. Colonel Clancy, what's difficult? What's hard to accomplish to get to where you want to be?
I mean, I think we've had a lot of good points about This is identity is a lot of things end to end,
right.
And in the Department of Defense, it's a huge problem of scale. We have a lot of organizations that are stakeholders and part of delivering the aggregate capability, and there's a lot of complexity in terms of a little change here really can propagate to value downstream, but we need to figure out how to describe that value and make it a part of our decision making without trying to centralize everything. And I think we recognize that in the department, and our senior leadership and the CIO has identified the need to sort of take an end-to-end approach in defining a strategy and using the governance that we have in order to highlight those value decisions that are internal to smaller organizations, so that we can really get after what's a fundamental capability. Identity is required to support lethality with information sharing, not just internal to the department, but with partners. We've got a lot of excess capability that we could sort of narrow down if we could streamline some of these functions and focus on better data quality and things like that. But we have to build that trust in how all these things fit together, and that it's going to be there tomorrow, and we won't have a local decision to deprecate some capability that isn't of perceived utility locally, but across the department, we really need something.
Excellent. Some excellent points brought out here on this particular subject. And I want to hear from our industry guests too, but we first need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Amir Dastouri from Homeland Security, Tom Clancy from DOD, Jay Brooks from FBI, Joel Minton from GSA, Sean Frazier from MobileIron, Barrie Carson from SailPoint, and Dan Conrad from One Identity. We've been talking about the challenges with identity programs. Let's talk to Barrie Carson. How about at SailPoint? What do you see as some of the challenges with getting these programs completed?
Well, one of the things, areas of challenge I see is one of what I'll call awareness and understanding. Historically, when people have thought about identity, it's been focused on authentication and also some simple provisioning of access, and that certainly is part of identity management. But we need to educate people on the value of and the shift in thinking to more of an identity governance perspective. Again, it's about not just the authentication, but the authorization and having good governance around that. So we see the need to go out and educate people on that and bring them along to the thinking of looking at identity governance as really being the key driver in identity programs and the key value.
I've heard governance and business processes a lot in this discussion here today. Dan Conrad, what do you think challenges?
Well, I have to agree with that. I mean, we're seeing some definite concerns around the governance side. One of the things we run into, I would say it's been a problem in the past, some challenges, things are getting better, is a customer will have a list of requirements. Their ability to develop lists of real requirements has really come a long way. And I don't know if their skill sets are growing or if we're understanding them better, but that communication gap that we had before from what they thought they wanted to do to what they really need to do, and to interpret that to us and us to communicate back to them has really changed.
Absolutely.
It's been very helpful.
Well, thanks. Good points. Sean Frazier, what do you think some of the big challenges we need to overcome to get where we need to be?
So obviously we look at everything through a mobile lens, go figure. Everything's kind of mobile. So we look at identity.
MobileIron, who knew?
We look at user identity as kind of one dimension of identity from a challenge perspective. We look at a few other things too from where we kind of look at. We look at device identity, application identity. Is this the right device? Is this the right user? All of these things kind of play a role in the mix of, can this user get access to this content? Can the user see this data? The other challenges, and Colonel Clancy mentioned it earlier, is we're all kind of focused on the users we own, but what about the federation? What about the users that we don't own? That's a big challenge with extending the network, extending the content access to folks that we don't control.
Thanks. Good point. And now I'm going to stay right with you, Sean, because like we do on all of our shows, we like to talk about the future a little bit, your predictions, where this is all going, what difference will these programs make to the government in the future, to the country in the future, and so forth. So what's your crystal ball look like? Where do you see these programs going? We each have about a minute or so to lay out a vision of where this is all going.
So I think we're all on a good path for derived credential. Obviously, everyone at this table lives and breathes that every single day. I look at that as one path along the journey. I don't think derived credential is necessarily the end-all, be-all of everything we do with identity. I look at things like facial recognition, the things that Apple and Samsung and these guys are doing for multi-factor identity as being the wave of the future, kind of taking the onus off of creating that credential and kind of doing that proofing that Joel talked about earlier and making that easier for the user to prove who they are by things that they have on them. So I see that as a big part of our future.
Yeah, I do too. I think that's an excellent point. Joel, Minton, where's this all going? How is the government going to change? How are programs the government offers to the people going to change? What's identity going to do? I have the opinion that if we get the identity right, a lot of other things fall into place pretty easily. What do you see for the future, Joel?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you that identity is the core building block that everything else can be built on. And I love that you came to me after Sean, because my first thing that I think needs a ton of innovation and needs a lot of great integration across private industry and the government is the use of the hardware devices that people already have in their identity proofing and in their identity authentication as well. There's so much opportunity with everything, the devices that you and I use every day, to be able to use those to have a much better identity experience. So that's one really big area. Another is that in the future I see us consolidating on fewer identities. I don't think we can have hundreds of identities and have the users have it make sense. So I think it's important to consolidate and try to make sure that the users understand the identities that they have and how they manage those. So both of those two things I think are things that are coming in the future.
Excellent points. Dan Conrad, One Identity, what's it look like in your crystal ball? Where's this all going? What's it going to mean to us in the future?
I have hopes and fears, right?
Okay.
So the fears would be a series of IAM buzzwords that we chase, and I hope we don't go down that route. What I see people asking for in next-gen type things is big data kind of concepts in the identity and access management space. So big data analysis or responsive IDM based on big data information or information from any source, which can go along with something like blockchain identity. We see ABAC being a big push, and some of our customers who really understand how they want to give your users access to things, and that can change things quite a bit in the future. So.
Yeah. I'm big on blockchain too, for what I've been learning about it. The more I hear about it, the more exciting it gets to do, not just for like Bitcoin kinds of applications, but for a whole series of different things down the road. And I think you're right on there. That's going to be a big technology that's going to make a big difference. Jay Brooks, what's it look like to you down the road? Where's this all going?
So, I mean, for us, and most likely for other organizations, it is absolutely mobility. And with the next generation of employees coming on board, they're even going to demand more mobile solutions. And when we look at that, we have to look at that next generation employee user patterns where they're more intent on sharing not only applications but also devices. And from that perspective, we're looking at things like continuous authentication that basically says, look, there's sort of like a hole in the security where a person might leave their device or share their device with somebody else. And within that small period of time when the original authentication would time out and the new owner of that device, even though it's temporary, would have access to a system. Continuous authentication based on typing rhythms or keystroke patterns and things like that would actually allow us to determine, wait a minute, this device has changed hands, even if it was temporary in nature, and therefore we need to lock it down to prevent, the unauthorized access to our systems.
Never thought of that. Continuous authentication. Barrie, over at SailPoint, what do you see? Where do you see this all going? What's it look like the future to you?
Absolutely. Well, we see the opportunity for the agencies really on the cusp of being able to create an infrastructure that will enable them to see everything in their environment. That includes the employees, contingent workforce, mobile access, the idea that data and applications live not only on premise but in the cloud, and to be able to effectively and efficiently see that, to govern it effectively. That is, to be able to apply the policies, risk assessments, and so forth in a highly automated way that make these processes efficient and effective also. And the last but not least is to really empower the end users to access those services in a way that's mobile, sort of consumer-oriented, and enables them to effectively access the things that they need in a way that makes sense, as simple as and efficient for them.
Excellent point, and the same goes to with the next generation of employees. I've got 7 grandkids, and they're running circles around me what they can do in some of the devices they use. I'm glad I got to the senior leadership before these kids get in the workplace, because they're doing some amazing things. Colonel Clancy, what's this look like to you down the road?
Jim, I think really trying to cut it to the chase. I mean, I think we have to figure out how to elevate the dialogue about identity so that it is an operational mission context. And that we empower those senior leaders with the knowledge and awareness of what is on the table and what is available, so they can express demands across IT program boundaries and drive that harmonization and integration end to end, and outside of their organizations as well. And the flip side of that, and we've been talking about that, is we need to educate the users as well and give them the vocabulary to express demands about their user experience, so that we can work from the top and the bottom and kind of converge to something that's going to meet all those demands more organically.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. The discussion's all around identity theft. I mean, it's all over the place. But the focus should be on protecting the identity, so we don't have the identity thefts, and get that dialogue elevated and focus on that side of the equation. Amir from DHS, where's this all going for you? What's your vision for the future for these programs, and how will it make a difference in the things we do?
Well, Jim, I'll tell you, it's tough to go at the end here because I think everybody's already laid out what the future looks like, but I'll try to add a couple insights of some of the things I see. Number one, we heard a lot about kind of identities, the perimeter. There is no perimeter. In addition to that, you hear a lot of prevention's just not good enough, right? It's not good enough to say we're going to block our borders. You have to have that detection and analytics capability, because you have to assume you're going to get breached, and you have to be able to detect and very quickly respond to it.
You need a resilience program.
You need a resilience program, and I think a lot of that goes into analytics. So things like, if you look at it purely from an identity perspective, you have not only who are our people and what do they have access to, but things like what are they doing with that access? When are they logging in? What are they logging into? What types of access do they have? Are they privileged, unprivileged? What are they accessing, and what are they doing with it? And is their behavior different than it usually is? So some of that analytics purely on identity, and then you couple that with the security analytics of, well, what are those machines or servers or applications they're accessing? Are there any vulnerabilities on that? Did that server not get patched and this guy's accessing it with a privileged account? And that level of analytics allows you to build that internal capability to quickly respond, notify, or even cut off access immediately to be able to respond to anything abnormal. The other thing I'll mention is really kind of identity as a service, I'll say. I think that's maturing definitely. But some of the challenges I see is allowing the kind of scalability of a common service for everybody with the flexibility of adapting it, especially because our identities are going everywhere, right? We have our on-prem synchronizing over to Office 365, and we have a bunch of stuff in Azure, standing up infrastructure as a service with AWS and other things, and then software as a service applications that we access. how do you manage all of that hybrid cloud on-prem with a really managed service provider?
Excellent.
I think is great thing.
Excellent stuff. Well, let me try to do some summarizing here. We covered a lot of territory, but I'm really glad that we're doing this show because I've been the victim of 6 breaches, one of which turned into a identity theft itself, and it was an absolute nightmare. So I need you guys to come through, man. I don't want to go through that again. Anyway, we talked about a lot of progress. Mobile came up right off the bat, mobile security. We talked about process re-engineering for identity management, and that it will, in most cases, require some process re-engineering. Talked about an architecture or putting together an architecture based on standards in order to have sort of a map to work against as these programs go through. We talked about trusted IDs and a trusted ID exchange between different entities and getting to that level. Governance came up quite a bit, both in progress as well as programs, talking about access management governance and having a governance process in place. CDM, of course, we're all familiar with, and it made it in the discussion quite a bit. Login.gov as a program, US Access, PIV cards, federated standards, privileged access management were all things we talked about on programs. Lessons, we need to get the requirements right, both physical and logical, and recognizing they're not the same thing. My favorite line of the day is it's not an IT problem, it's a business problem. We realize that the scope is bigger than we sometimes imagine, and you need to start small and evolve the program and let it evolve as time goes on. We talked about the various silos and how to work about breaking them down so that identities can pass through those various entities. Well, we got the challenges. Skills and capacity came up quite a bit as one. We need the depth. We need skilled people. We need engineers, and it's hard to get them. The face of the competition for skills is tough. We talked about business processes, and culture and governance has to change. It's going to be, there's some culture issues there. People are used to doing things the way people always done things, and they might have to do things different. And we talked about the data quality issue and how important it is to get the data quality right and try to work that. When we talked about vision, we talked about derived credentials evolving into more biometrics, and biometrics becoming an important piece. We talked about the importance of blockchain and how blockchain would work into the things in the future. We recognized next generation workforce is going to demand a lot more in the mobility world. And I like that concept of continuous authentication. I thought that was a very interesting concept. And I know Amir talked about analytics for anomalies and how we can look at that. With that, I want to thank our guests for taking time from their busy schedules to be here. Thank our sponsors, without which we don't have a show, so thank you very much. Thank the very fine people here at Federal News Radio that do such a fine job. Thanks to Tom Trezza for helping put this together. Thanks to, most importantly, thanks to our listening audience out there that tune into the show each month to hear us discuss these important topics. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM.